annual Helen Clark Berlin Symposium. I'm Martha Johnson. I'm the director here at Affairs in Laverne. I'd like to welcome you all here today. Thanks for being here, and thank you, President Bateman, for being here this morning. The Berlin Symposium is always held in conjunction with the college's annual exhibition of contemporary art, and we are surrounded today by the 106th annual exhibition, Carceral States. We kicked off the symposium last night with the screening of the documentary 13. Who was here last night? Anyone? A few people? Yeah. And that offered an in-depth look at the prison system in the U.S. Randolph professor Dr. Noah Wolf introduced the film and led a discussion afterwards. This morning, it's my pleasure to introduce one of the artists featured in Carceral States, Mansura Khanam, who created the wonderful photojournalistic story entitled On the Outside, on display in Gallery 4 along the Women of York installation. She graciously accepted our invitation to come talk to us about this deeply personal project. Mansura Khanam is a visual journalist based in Brooklyn, born in Bangladesh and raised in the New York metro area. She studied history and African studies at Rutgers University. She also studied international affairs at the graduate program in international affairs at the New School, where her fieldwork included legal assistance to individuals undergoing the UN High Commissioner for Refugees status determination process in Hong Kong. With a growing desire to document what she saw, she shifted to visual journalism. She attended the Photojournalism and Documentary Photography program at the International Center of Photography in New York City, where she received the George and Joyce Moss Scholarship. Khanam's work has been exhibited at the Museum of the City of New York, Photoville, and the International Center of Photography. She's been published by CNN and other news outlets. Please join me in welcoming Mansura Khanam.
Thank you all for coming on a Saturday morning to this talk. Thank you for inviting me. What an incredible exhibition. I'm really honored to be here. So, I'm a documentary photographer. My day job is a newspaper photographer, actually, for local newspapers in Manhattan and Long Island. I sometimes work for the Wall Street Journal, but I really love working for the local newspapers. And I'm telling you this because I made a choice a few years ago. I had the opportunity to go travel again abroad and photograph abroad. And I've struggled with figuring out where my home is my entire life. As Martha said, I was born in Bangladesh, but I basically came here when I was 3 years old. So I'm American. But what does being an American actually mean these days? And so I made a commitment to myself to photograph my community, where I live, the pertinent stories that are affecting the community where I am. And it's helped me become more a part of New York, more a part of this country, and figure out where I stand and how to contribute. So one of the biggest issues facing our country is this incarceration system. And women are the fastest growing population in the U.S. prison system. So I decided, this is a project that I started in school actually at the International Center of Photography. There was an assignment to photograph youth in New York City. And I thought, okay, here's an issue that I'm passionate about. How do I incorporate both into this assignment? So I found Jacob through a friend, and Jacob was 13 at the time. I started photographing this project in 2012, and I've continued to this day actually. So, and Jacob was in high school, and his mom had been incarcerated for the better part of his entire life. I think she went in when he was 2 years old. And I was really interested in the caregiver aspect of the growing number of women in the prison system. Who takes care of the people on the outside? What happens when a mother is incarcerated? So Jacob At the time, I'm going to move around a little bit. It's fine. Okay, so is this okay? Can you hear me?
You're great.
So at the time, Jacob actually was on a 12-day hiatus from school because he'd gotten into a fight. And so they suspended him from school, and so he was very grumpy and felt like he had a huge chip on his shoulder, and he just was not really open to the idea of being photographed. But then, and this is his mom and Jacob at the Bedford Hills Women's Facility, and this is one of the few photographs that they have together, because as you know, in correctional facilities, it's really difficult to take photographs. But one of the, I'll just backtrack to when I first met Jacob, but I'll focus on this photograph for a little bit. In Bedford Hills, they have this program facilitated by an outside NGO that helped families visit mothers in prison. And they had a busing system, they had programs for the kids, and they created this room inside the prison that looked more like a rec room, which was huge. Because for Jacob, he actually just thought that his mother lived somewhere else. And they talked for, pretty much every single weekend. Sorry, these photographs are a little bit out of the loop. We had some technical difficulties this morning, but this is Rosa going at her, during the end of her incarceration. She was at a halfway house and she got to work at a diner. But I'm actually going to forward through to well, anyway, I'll keep talking while this rolls. You can actually just keep it on computer. I think it's fine since they're and I can always go back to something. So what I was saying about the Bedford Hills facility and his mom, not really realizing that his mother was in prison, a few years after that, his grandfather died. And it was the first time that he'd seen his mother in shackles when they brought her to the funeral. And she was escorted by 2 guards. Great. Let's see if we can find. That's his grandmother. So this is his grandmother, and I think Jacob was about 10 when his grandfather passed away. But that idea that this facility and the humanity of the way this NGO helped these women that had visitation from, very, very distant families at the time. This is throwing me off a little bit, but that's okay. And then realizing that his mother was actually incarcerated, and what that meant, that she was on guard all the time. So while he was becoming an adolescent, that's when the realization started to sink in. Prior to that, he would miss his mom, but then he always got to talk to her over the phone, and his grandmother was always there. So his grandmother, Deanna, was very resistant to this project. She just, the first time I met her, she had her hands folded and was just like, why are you even doing this? Fine, you can come. First, she wouldn't even let me in the house. She basically said, you can go photograph him on the basketball court. That's what you want, don't you? Just him. And I thought, well, sure, I thank you for letting me photograph him, but you're really the story. You're the caregiver. You and hundreds of grandparents and caregivers like you across the country. And so the more I talked to her about it, the more she opened up, and she actually became the biggest advocate for this project. When Jacob, being a teenager, would not show up for appointments or times when we set up meetings, she would go find him on the court and bring him back. So and then you'll see later that she got so comfortable, she allowed me to photograph her in pretty much every situation, getting ready for church. But she really, at a time when she thought she was done raising children, she was raising 2 teenage boys, because Jacob has an older brother as well, that you'll see, and that's Joey, his older brother. And Joey had a stint at the juvenile detention center, and he would come home on the weekends for good behavior. Sorry, these are all. We're just going to cycle through these, and we'll get back to one photograph in particular, and it's stuck. Well, the photograph that's in the catalogs with the grandmother holding on to Joey as he goes off. She was preying on him at the time. So she had an incredible amount of love, support, you name it. By that time, she had become a single parent because her partner had died. And she was figuring it out. She was also an immigrant. They're from the Dominican Republic. So she would take English classes in the weekend so that she could help Jacob with his homework. You know, these sorts of things that kind of slide under and people don't ever really see. So that's what I wanted to bring to the surface with this story. So it's not a sensational story. It's not one that, you know, the Times or whatever would splash across its covers, but for me it was really important to show the family and what it means, what family bonds mean in a situation like this when they're stressed. So now let's just go through the pictures. And I'm also totally open to questions if one. So this is one of the earliest photographs I took. And this was Jacob. He was actually ironing, so his Sunday routine is that he would iron his own clothes for the rest of the week. And he and his grandmother would do laundry together. And this is another photograph that made me feel like I can do this, and this makes sense to me. He was walking to school with his friends, and I remember him saying, just randomly, New York City is a really hard place. Everybody thinks it's a city of lights, but it's so hard. People look at you in different ways. Some people think that say that they're your friends, but they're not. Other people, there's so much competition. And this was just a 13-year-old kid walking to school, feeling like this. So he would always have these moments of deep adult thought. It felt like deep adult thoughts to me. And this is the apartment with Jacob in what is kind of a tiny closet off of his grandmother's room. And this photograph is actually a picture in the reflection of the dresser of his grandmother's bedroom. And that's where his little tiny bedroom was. And I wanted to show the apartment because one of the things that happened when Rosa went away is the apartment started, or the home itself started to fall apart. And it's something that the grandmother shared, like she just wasn't motivated to fix anything anymore. She wasn't motivated to pull things together the way she did in the past. And that's the grandmother. And in this situation, she was talking to one of her girlfriends, telling her how frustrating it was that Jacob just wanted to buy sneakers and t-shirts and didn't understand what it meant to run a household. And this is the photograph where she's saying goodbye to Joey. One note about Joey, since then, he actually got out and has finished college. So he's, and this is Jacob on laundry day with his friends on 135th Street. And this is Deanna on her dresser, and these are all of the photographs that she has photographed throughout the entire house. And you can see there's a graduation picture of Rosa tucked in the back. And that's the grandmother. And this was a particularly difficult day when Jacob got his report card. And she was really frustrated with how poorly he had done in one subject. It's Joey. And that's Deanna getting ready for church. And this is Rosa in the halfway house. So they the last 2 years of her sentence were in Paterson, New Jersey, which was also very far from Harlem. but they liked visiting her in the diner because it wasn't as restricted as the halfway house. So they would often just go. In the meantime, Rosa would have to serve other tables, but they loved the space. Go and hang out. And once in a while, she'd get to come and sit down for 5 minutes. So they were at a road table. And this is Jacob visiting her at the halfway house. And something remarkable would happen every time he'd get around his mother. Because he was, he's like 14 or 15 in this picture. And he was a big posturer, and he's towering. He towers over his mother. His mother is about my height. But whenever he would get around her, he would turn into this little boy. So I personally love this picture. And this is Jacob back in Harlem walking their dog Dutch, who's since died. And this is a view from their bedroom. And this is the same bedroom the day that Rosa was released. It also happened to be Mother's Day. And this was one of the first photographs I took of Rosa in the apartment. And this was a year and a half later. Rosa had found 2 part-time jobs that she was very happy with. She was still struggling to find an apartment, which, as you know, reentry is really difficult, and having a record, and particularly in New York City, housing is very difficult. So they're all in the apartment that the grandmother owns in Harlem. And this was the first week that Rosa came back. She said the hardest thing was getting back into technology. Being in prison for over a decade, so much had changed, and there were no, one of us talked about this morning. The barrier to technology in prisons is because of security issues, but it's really leaves a big gap in the process of reentry. And this is the remodeled apartment. After Rosa came back, the grandmother was then motivated to paint the house, to hang up the photographs, and yeah, this is several years later. Jacob is now a sophomore in college. So I'm open to questions. I'd really love to hear your thoughts.
What was the reason for Rose's imprisonment?
Well, she's very open about this, so I'll share this with you. It was drug-related charges, and as you know, the drug laws were very harsh at the time. But there was also a. So let me tell you a little bit about Rosa and how I've done a lot of audio recordings and interviews of her and her time, and she's also written a lot while she was in and since she's come out. And one of the things that she said is that when she was younger, she just thought she was invincible. She thought she had 2 boys, I'll put drugs in the strollers, who's gonna look at me, who's gonna, I'm taking care of my family, I'm taking the kids to school and dropping them. But something went wrong in one of the apartments. One of her partners did something, and she was subsequently blamed for that. So yeah, that's any other yes.
First, I'll say thank you for your work. And also, has Jacob or Joy, or both of them, given you a summary of the impact this project has had on their lives?
No, I mean, not in that way, not the summary.
Not a summary,
Yeah.
but some kind of feedback.
Well, they both love seeing pictures of themselves, not in an overloaded way, but again, something else we were discussing this morning about the impact of prison. There's small things like you don't get to take photographs next to your mom often. that one photograph, the second shot with inside a little photo album, was one of the few photographs that he has of him and his mom together. And that one in the halfway house, I snuck that picture in before they told me you're not supposed to be doing that. And I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing that, but I did it anyways. It was a moment that I wanted to capture, and I hope I'm visual for that. But yeah, so I think and I've made them smaller books with other photographs, and I think that they really appreciate that part and seeing that. The other component of this that isn't here is the audio component. And I think for Jacob in particular, before his mother came back, I would ask him a lot of questions about how he feels about this, what does he think about this, and he would vacillate between, I know my mom, I love my mom, she's my mom, to I don't know who she is. I haven't been with her for, 10-something years. I have no idea who she is. She is my mom, but she's really not my mom. And so he would go through these shifts. But as you can see, this is home life now, right? So I think they really appreciate having photographs together at this point. Yes.
Can you talk about how you changed as a photographer through the course of this project?
Thank you for that question, indeed. So I struggled with this project in the beginning. I struggled with why I was doing it, what were the motivations on my part for taking on a project like this. And there are personal ones, like I said, I wanted to do a New York story that had wider social impact. I wanted to particularly deal with this story of women being incarcerated, people that are the caregivers. It's been a focus of mine. I think in the immigrant community, there's a lot of caregivers that are never given credit for, never acknowledged, never. So that's always been a thread in a lot of my work. And personally, I feel like I made mistakes that could have landed me in her. I felt a great affinity towards Rosa. She's my age. She's lived somewhat of a life that if I had taken certain paths, could have been mine. And so that was the initial sort of draw to this project. In terms of documenting, what I learned was getting slower was better. I first went in thinking, I have to, I don't have a lot of time. She's not going to let me take pictures of him here, so I'm just going to take as many photographs as my roles in the beginning in 2012 to where they are in 2016. Vastly different. I've gotten much slower, much calmer, much more solid in the fact that moments arise. Human moments will arise the longer you wait. Better human moments will arise. You have to be ready for them. I also feel that I figured out how to tap into that sense of connection and getting someone to really tell their story versus imposing my own. Even though, for instance, I choose these types of moments to broadcast, to show. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Could you say something more about the program that made it possible for family to visit the incarcerated moms and pray directly in the United States?
Yes, I can also share that link. I think it's called Healing Hands. There's several in New York City. I know there's several in Connecticut. One of the biggest issues is with prisons and prison populations. So a large majority of prison populations are pulled from city populations, and yet prisons are way out there. And the bus rides you have to take out full days, if not 2 or 3 days, to go and visit someone. So this project, Healing Hands, they made it, it was specifically for mothers that were incarcerated and children and parents to go visit. So they would do child-friendly activities, they would help moms cope with missing their children. Like, this is, you know, Rosa talked about when she first went in, she couldn't breathe. She had to sit down and learn how to meditate and pray, and she from just simply missing her kids. So this is, Healing Hands was one of them. There's another, there's several other NGOs that work in this area, yes.
Just about, do we know, or can you share Rosa's story? Where is she today, working, going to school?
Yes, so she's taking a few classes. She's working at a medical institution. She has 2 part-time jobs that she treats as though they are full-time jobs, and she's enjoying herself. She would like to have her own apartment, but as I said, that's been one of her biggest struggles is the finding her own space and getting to a place where she can, one, afford the space, and 2, just be given the chance to have her own space.
What were those 2 part-time jobs that she was able to get with her record?
So one was as a receptionist in a medical facility, and she divulged her record, and she actually started working and so both of them are receptionist positions. She's very outgoing, and she's moving up now, and she's getting administrative work as well. Yes.
So when you came into this project, did you come in from the beginning when she got incarcerated? And how long of a time frame to where you are now did it take to get everything as you have it?
So no, I was not present when she was first incarcerated, because that was about 12 years ago. And how long what was the second part? How long did it?
How long has this journey been?
So I started, the first photographs I took were in 2012, but the bulk of it, like this one I think was 2013, and he was 14 years old at the time. And it was interesting because I first started photographing Jacob because I got permission from his grandmother. And to get to Rosa was a bit more difficult. It was a lot of waiting and writing and calling and talking and just getting her to trust me too. It was a very hard, there was always something in the beginning to let down the guard, obviously. So from 2012 to about 2016 were the last apartment photographs, and that other one, this one. And he had just come home from school, and she had just come home from work.
And have you or will you take on another project such as this?
So also a great question. So with this project, I'm still working on the audio component of it, and there's also some video that I shot of Jacob going through his days. So there's still that I'm kind of pulling together. And then I also want to incorporate some of Rosa's writing, so that component is happening at this time. And currently, well, I have another long-term project to document all of the known and unknown spaces of solitary confinement, specifically the ones listed at Department of Justice. So that's, and just the spaces, nothing, no people in the spaces. But as you know, that's been a really difficult, writing to a lot of wardens, getting a lot of no's. But it's a slow, kind of committed to doing that. So yes, and there's another portrait project dealing, it's more of a conceptual piece that's dealing with juries and the makeup of juries. So, yes, that's it. Yes.
Is Jacob living at home with his mother while he goes to college, or did he go away for the college?
He went away the first year, and I believe the second year he's commuting.
Where is he?
SUNY, State University of New York. Red jacket.
Yeah. How did you find this family, and was this a strictly personal project?
So it started off as, while I was still at ICP, there's a kind of a capstone course that you have to take, and one of the assignments is growing up in New York. And you can choose anything you want with that assignment. And I knew that I wanted to deal with this issue. So I kind of put the feelers out, and then it turned out that a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, who was teaching at a high school, was Jacob's former teacher. And so she knew his story and connected me to the family. So that's always something, right? Like I initially had tried, to put made all these phone calls, and often it's really your personal connections that get you to personal stories. Yeah. Yes.
I'm interested in, I really enjoyed you talking about how your process changed over time when you slowed down. And I was wondering, what are you looking for when you're there with them? And are you talking to them, or are you
Yes.
in the background? And what is it that that you know?
So with the grandmother, I definitely had to talk to her. I had to, at this point, it was like I'd become a part of the family in a sense. And she was also quite, if you think about it, she was, in one aspect of her life, was quite lonely after her husband passed away. And, everybody's in that rush, especially with teenage boys, they're rushing, and they're always out, right? So often I would just go and sit with her and see what she was up to and it's a lot of talking. I always have my camera sort of ready, but not always up. And so it would be ready, and if I saw something, I would bring it up. And initially she was very conscious of the camera, and she would often laugh or get upset or say, okay, it's time to put that down. But at this point, it's sort of just there. Jacob was a lot less. He just was like, that's cool, you're photographing. And he would just ignore it and just go on he was kind of an ideal subject, actually, because he clearly was used to being photographed by friends and things, and they all took pictures of each other. So it was fine for the camera to be out. Rosa was the hardest. Rosa always knew when the camera was there, and she was always guarded and always, understandably so, I think. Yes.
I read your focus, but maybe I missed it. Is the father alive?
He is alive, but he doesn't live with them and anything, a very little contact with them.
First of all, thank you very much for a lovely story. I was intrigued about Jacob's growing up and digested the fact that his mother was not with him. In your time working with him, did you learn of him getting any kind of help, therapy that will allow him to accept things and maybe assist them? And in other words, do you know if there were institutions or if there were private places, companies that will care for him, for a child, will be separated from the mother?
That's a great question. So besides what they did at the Bedford Hills facility, Jacob got the chance to go to KIPP charter school. I don't know if you're familiar with KIPP here. And it's a fantastic, it's modeled with social justice education for single. So he got a lot of counseling there, and he had counselors that stuck with him through his entire educational process. And he sort of lumps me into that group, which I think is funny. He's like, oh, I haven't heard from you or her in a little while. So this is, And so my friend was one of the instructors in that school. Yes.
Just a question, how you develop the trust with the individuals?
I'm sorry.
How the process of developing trust with individuals, did they have a right to review the photos? Were they resistant to just letting you take any shot without seeing them? Did they get comfortable and say, we now trust? I mean, what's that process of going from being very outside to being trusted with their story?
That's a great question. So as a documentary photographer, I don't generally let my subjects review the photographs. For a number of reasons, so I think that when we want photographs of ourselves, we look for certain things. And in telling a story, it's a different mechanism of choice. And so, no, I didn't exactly give them the choice. I think that certainly I would have taken it into account if they felt strongly against any photograph. They never expressed any of that. I always showed it to them, but for instance, they never gave any input on which pictures to choose, which pictures to include. The grandmother had gotten so comfortable by the end, she just, even there was one photograph of her in her bra preparing, and she just thought, oh, that's great, I'm going to be famous. It was a joke between us, because in the beginning she was so resistant, and I said, no way, your story is the most important story. Back to your question about how much talking. I realized I had to tell them a lot about myself. So as much as they gave, I also had to give myself. And particularly with the grandmother, she wanted to know about my family. She wanted to know what I was feeling, what I went through. And when you start a relationship like this and it lasts over several years, things happen in your own life, and you show up one day and you're, or I had surgery one time and she called late times just to make sure I was okay, which is just a wonderful thing. But that's her nature, right? The caregiver nature was expressing itself even in this relationship. Yes.
Was it difficult for Jacob to kind of share his experience or his situation amongst his peers? Was it common amongst his peers? Was he the only one in his group of friends that had a parent that was incarcerated? Was he ever ashamed or embarrassed when you were photographing him and his friends, knowing why you were there, the purpose of you being there?
No. He actually was very open about it. He had kind of incorporated the story of his life from an earlier age. And so for him it was more, I think from a really young age he was talking about it, and everybody was talking about it around him. But the place where it showed the cracks, if you will, was when he began to realize what it actually was. So I think he had the words from way back when, and he would talk about it, and his friends knew about it. His group of friends that you saw in the photographs, they all knew about his situation. And I believe one or two may have had not similar situations, but like situations. But it was more. What I got from him in my interviews were that his realization of what it actually meant that she was in prison. Like I said, that time when she came to the funeral in shackles, that blew him away with the two officers and in an orange jumpsuit. She said he had never seen her like that. He just didn't understand. He had no idea what that was like until that moment, which also is a big question, right? Like, why are you bringing her in shackles in an orange jumpsuit with leg shackles and arm shackles to a funeral?
So when he was visiting her and stuff, did she have a different uniform? Was there, because you said they made the area like a recreation area at the prison,
Yeah, I think she was able to, like that photograph that you saw, she was able to some of her regular clothes. Or either that, or he just never connected. Maybe it wasn't the full orange jumpsuit. He just never connected it. He said, it was one of the things he kept going back to, like, I'd never seen her like that. I'd never, I just didn't think, it didn't dawn on me.
When the realization hit him, was it, like, how would you describe the emotion? Was he angry at himself, angry at his mom? Did he feel bad for her? Like,
this is interesting because that's it just propels me to hurry up and edit this piece because he was just blown away. There was no the anger at his mom and anger in general was around other things, but that moment where he was expressing what he felt when she walked in, he also, it was, if you remember, it's mixed in with a lot of sadness. So he said something like, everybody was crying and everybody was sad because my grandfather had passed away. I just remember being at this cemetery. I'd never been to a cemetery before. It was raining. And that's when my mother walked in and I thought, oh, what's going on? It was this shock and sense of total, it was a surreal experience for him. And then that stayed with him, and he kept thinking about it later. And you had a question.
So, being a returning citizen and witnessing women in prison being, torn away from their children, and that disconnect, do you feel that this project kind of opened up a window? I kind of think it did in the last statement about that. There was a compassion almost with Jacob and his mother once he got to realize, really what was happening, the harsh reality. Do you feel that, I can remember talking to, many women, and they didn't have a connection with their child on the outside. Like, what do we talk about? He's a teenager now, or she's a teenager now, and, just really trying to keep those lines of communication going. Do you feel that this project, helped kind of open the windows and, connect them in a way?
I'm not sure if I will put that much on this in that way. So what I think is I found what was already there. And what was there was a grandmother who had worked against all odds to make sure that the family unit stayed together. So and she talks about it, when Rosa went to Bedford Hills and then when the grandfather died, she has 2 other sons. Rosa has 2 brothers, and they came in and helped raise the boys, helped her in raising the boys. And you saw that photograph of Rosa and Diana in the...
Yeah, that brought tears right
This one, yeah. In the restaurant. And there's a great, they have a relationship, so she's maintained that relationship. And I asked her about it, like, how do you feel? What did you do? And she said, of course I was angry at her in the beginning. Of course, like, how could she do this to us? How could she have done, she's living her life, but how could she have done this to us and our family? But she, but then you get over that, right? And she's like, she's still my daughter, and she's, the children's mother, and and it's to her credit, really, that there is a relationship. There were a lot of support systems and other things that helped this family, but it's Diana that did this. Okay. Yes.
Have you exhibited this project in other venues where Jacob has been able to see the work,
In a gallery setting. Yeah. Well, I showed the work at the Bronx Documentary Center when it was first happening, and that's a teenager, he kept missing the dates. So, yeah, while I was still actually working on the project itself. So no, he's never actually seen it blown up big like this. We've always sat down next to each other on the computer, and he's seen it in his apartment. But there have been a few articles that published a number of pictures, and so they've seen this. So one of the things that happens every time this piece comes out, every time for Rosa, is she also has to contend with a public, even though she's very public with this, she has to give talks, she has to contend with a new person, a different person, saying, oh, I saw you on such and such. And it's a difficult, and that's something I struggle with too. There have been some places that I've actually said no to just simply because I didn't feel it was the right place for this to come out.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mansura.
Thank you.
Will be the panel discussion. So please join us for those things, and we'll see you soon.